is about, virtual research environments, virtual labs, science gateways, the different names we have on different continents, platforms. And how could fairness badges for providers, developers, and users of VREs look like? And that is the topic. And I give first, what are virtual research environment science gateways? And since we are a small group, is everyone aware of Science Gateway or virtual research environment? And I'm happy to give more introduction, but if everyone knows, then I think we can go without this introduction.
Sandra, I'm wondering, because it is recorded, it might be worthwhile just going through, because people who possibly listen to it who are not familiar with it.
That is a good point. Okay, so if you look at research computing, we have nowadays research questions we can answer, which we could not even ask maybe like 20 years ago. We have, these huge data and hardware and software, which is really developing fast. And there's a lot of skills required because there's this increased complexity. And we have a greater need for openness and reproducibility and a lot of interdisciplinary distributed projects. And it drives policy questions. I mean, we have someone from NIH, Anu, who is looking at a repository to share a lot of data and simulations. And yeah, we need also the opportunity to integrate research with teaching, so to really have a better workforce preparation. And that means we need end-to-end solution that really can give broad access to everyone, whether they're from different domains, whether they have the technical skills, but really that researchers can focus on their science questions instead of dealing with the nitty-gritty details of technologies. And science gateways can help with that, or virtual research environment talk mostly about science gateways. And if you look at the landscape, so there are lab instruments, there are web-based agile frameworks. We have these distributed data and computing infrastructures, high-speed networks, research software, and yeah, it's data and compute intensive problems. And the researcher is in the middle of all this, and it can be overwhelming, dependent on how much they need to use it, whether they need HPC, whether they need to use complex lab instruments. And this is the need for science gateways, really, that they can focus on their research questions and to make a little bit sad-looking researchers and happy researchers. And if we look at it, we did the start with this virtual research environment interest group to look at these topics around science gateways and virtual research environment. We started with the 7th plenary. We at the 22nd one now, and really with different topics. So what is, for example, is there more opportunities for developing a more coordinated approach between these different platforms? What is about sustainability? What is a roadmap for sustainability and collaborative development? We had topics around skills and how to share knowledge really well, how to use novel concepts, whether we have a common reference model or common reference architecture for RSEs. And then we looked into the mixture with FAIR and science gateways. And also, for example, one of the sessions at the 18th plenary was around is fairness sufficient to increase trust in VREs and to still foster critical thinking. So we had these different topics. And so the interest group concept is really, it's an ongoing community effort. It's open-ended. And we had one working group with interviews on the 10 years vision. And we had a working group fair for virtual research environments. So I will show some results from this working group because that is at the moment in the process of being summarized. And we are happy to hear from you what other working groups you would like to see. And FAIR is really about this, guiding principles, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And there are a lot of efforts going on, and from FAIR for software, FAIR for data objects, for research objects, and all over different projects and the different continents. And for the FAIR for Virtual Research Environments Working Group, we have been 4 co-chairs. So Kiran is also on the call. Carrie and Laila unfortunately couldn't make it for this date, but maybe next week for the repeat session. And if you look for FAIR for virtual research environment, it has really a high complexity because, first of all, we have different target groups. We have FAIR for Science Gateway developers and FAIR for Science Gateway users. Then there's a complexity of granularity because if you look at virtual research environments, you can see them as software frameworks who provide services, who have maybe APIs. Some virtual research environments offer workflows. A lot of them have data included. A lot of them really also help with starting simulations. So simulations themselves could be then also again seen as software frameworks, also software themselves. So there are different levels of complexity. So we looked a little bit like, okay, how can we categorize it? And we looked at fair versus fair enabling. And so the science gateways as software frameworks themselves should be fair, like fair for software. So we looked at the guiding principles from that group, and it should be this easily discoverable and accessible, and also interoperate with other digital research infrastructures. And it's really about its components. It has a technical infrastructure. It's software itself. It has maybe services. And then it offers access to other digital objects, and that should then enable fairness for these other digital objects. So for example, if you have a science gateway that includes simulation, let's say for next-gen sequencing analytics. So the data you create out of that, you want that the data is available and fair, and you want also that how the data was created is accessible and also reproducible and reusable. So findable, so it should be easy to find the VREs and find components for the VREs to reuse. And yes, the digital objects that are produced by the VRE or within a VRE and data that is uploaded for humans and machines should be easily findable. So we did a couple of routes. I think we published this also with examples. I only wanted to show some examples that we really took the FAIR for VRE or FAIR for virtual research environments in a way that it's fair enabling or fair. So that is how we define it. And then we looked at the different categories that came out of the working group FAIR for research software. And we added the principles for virtual research environments. I'm happy to discuss more about this if there's interest, but just showing a little bit. So for example, we looked at the second findable guideline, and the VREs described with rich metadata. So we said, oh, that is something that is required, and we found also in the example that people can look at it. Yeah, Anu?
So maybe not so much about the fair part. I have 2 questions. How is a science gateway or a VRE different from a data commons? Or, how does this interest group or working group relate to the GORC? I'm just wondering. That's one question, and then I can ask my next question a little later. But I was also thinking, they have the trust principles that's built for or meant to be applicable to data resources, right? So have you looked at the trust principles at all with reference to VREs? Because to me, that seems to be more strongly applicable because it has an operational aspect to it that you don't have in FAIR. So those are my just
Yeah.
think.
So
Wow.
the first question, the difference between the data commons and virtual research environments. So what I've seen from data commons is that we also focus on how to build, for example, simulation workflows, how to make it easier for people to use simulations, create data, and that it's beyond sharing data. And then the other thing, because data commons is often in a very good way, it's more about how to add metadata, how to make it really fair, maybe with the trust principles. I can already answer, we did in this working group didn't look into it, but we want to do some continuation of the work, because that was the first step to use the fair for research software aspects, and with regard to the data commons, the definition is often a little bit different from what virtual research environment have to deliver, but I might have not seen the same infrastructure that other people have seen, and I've seen that Kiran has his hand up, and also Chris. So Kiran?
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. Yeah, just to also add to that, what Sandra was saying. I mean, it's the relationship between a data commons and a VRE are interesting, because there's sort of different parts of it, and a lot of these things are like fractals, right? You can go very deep in, you can zoom in or zoom out of that. A data commons is about a place that you can bring everything together, and it's for a community. You can have multiple, and virtual research environments are more tools that you use, right? You can string them together to do something, but in a commons you have access to all of a range of those. But it's also bringing that data to in there, the workflows, but it's also about the people and the processes that come around it. So there's a relationship, but it's how the different building blocks in there. And that's one that the GORC spent a lot of still, I don't think GORC's really got that sorted out, the relationship between the different parts, because the data commons can be very big, incorporating lots of things, but it could be fairly small as well. And at what point does something shift from being a data commons to a VRE? And where do we draw that? And to some degree, that's an arbitrary line in there as well. And I don't think we have got that line clear in there. And but the ends of it, if you look at it, is VREs are around specific tool sets or sets of tools, as a lab, that you got all the things you need to do some experiments in and get an output. Whereas a data commons is more the environment that has all the things you need. Some of them you might not use, but drawing an analogy I've used a couple of times. I've said to people, it's like being in your lab in a university. That's VRE is like your lab, and data commons is like the entire university in a sense, at one level. But where do those line?
And only, sorry, Karen, and let you continue. Only saying, and here we already see that my definition was that the data commons doesn't have tools, for example. But so maybe data commons and VREs, maybe data commons is another synonym we should list in our work besides science gateways and virtual labs and virtual research.
I don't think they are synonyms, and I think they're subtly different, but exactly at what point one shifts from in terms of scale and size, I think that's still open, and we haven't really worked that out for ourselves. And I think that's okay for it to be that way, because all of these things were evolving, right?
Yeah, it's a great. I mean, I just want to say, like, this is a great question, and I really like it, because like I was kind of looking at it, like, because I'm like, they do that and they do that, and I started thinking about it in the sense that, like, in some ways you can think about it like what resources like are like versus like data commons or VRE is like or as sort of gateways is like how much how do they sort of spend their resources, right? Like you know, because like I would imagine in some cases like a data commons spends resources more on this side, and I think one of the keys was the people comment that Kieran mentioned, and like the closeness with software and tools, you know. I think that that Sandra was saying, but I would say that it, you know, Commons has those resources as well. It's just like I think it's like you look at how that, like if we line those things up together, like you could probably see like, well, resources are more geared towards this and that in the Commons versus that, and but I would imagine there's a lot of overlap. I would imagine there'd be a lot of overlap, and probably with the Gork as well, because it's kind of interesting because we've had discussions. We have someone from the Gork in our at NBIS and at SciLife Lab, and we've actually looked at, you know, some of the things in the Gork of as far as, because we can be seen as a science gateway and a research computing environment. So again, there's overlap between all these. Like, so that's why I think it come back to your question is really good. I think you know, it'd be helpful to see these things together, you know, like our side by side, to see how the resources are spent and where, you know, like where the overlap is and where it isn't, because it's just a really interesting question.
So if I understand it correctly from what Kieran said, a VRE is more like a personalized infrastructure, and a data commons would be a more community infrastructure. Is that a good way of looking at it? Does a VRE actually deal with data at all, or is it just looking at your pipeline software and other
I know
things?
No,
it,
VREs are also looking at data,
Yeah.
so there are
Ah.
different types of VREs. Therefore, I said this definition is really difficult because it's also different continents differently. Therefore, this, as Chris said, this is a really good question. It's so normally I would define it as a VRE like a collaboration environment tailored to a specific community, but it can be a big community, for example, around a topic. It doesn't have to be at one campus. It can be a distributed team. It can be a distributed community. So I'm not so sure exactly where I would scale also. We have, for example, a VRE like NanoHub. They have over 1 million users worldwide. So and they call themselves a science gateway. You would maybe call them a data commons. So yeah, it's
yeah,
decide.
add
Yeah.
to that, I think that's where, you know, Anu, you're pointing in on some very interesting points here, right? And there's really good questions. I think looking at it from another perspective here is, you can think of these things as continuums, right? You go from an idea, you know, back in 2010, 2011, the ideas of virtual research environments or virtual labs were just an idea. There was a possibility that was there. No one knew what it looks like. We just like, oh, we know we do stuff in the lab, things are going digital, and we do it in that way, in the same idea. There's a lot of evolution happening, a lot of things. We're now at, you know, and over time they mature. We have a much better idea of, you know, the building blocks that make up a virtual environment, a research environment, or a virtual lab. But then somewhere, you know, 2016, 17 was when the idea of data commons started to emerge in our heads, right? And that was taking from looking at all the challenges, going, you know, we've done all these things. There are more pieces in the puzzle. It looks bigger than what we built here. Maybe what do we call it? We start to call it, you know, I was involved in this in 2016 when we were looking at it in Australia. We used to call it science clouds, right? Because there wasn't, data commons wasn't a word that had been coined at that time. That then by 2017, 18, so yeah, you know, data commons seems to be the right word for it, but it's all fuzzy at this point, right? And we haven't matured these things yet. And I think we've probably got a long journey ahead of us before we're really clear and we can really categorize these things. You know, that's clearly a VRE, and that's clearly a science a data commons. We can do that for some things, but there's a lot of gray in the middle and overlap, and it's more about sense making and saying, that kind of looks like a virtual research environment, or that sort of has those characters. And I think the work that Gork has been doing has been really, really valuable for that, because they've spent an extraordinary amount of time just working through what are all the little features and attributes that might be there in data commons. And I think that that's going to help us sort of understand, and compare these things and start to say, probably worth doing some exercise similar to that for what makes up all the attributes that make up a research environment. And then we might be able to do some of those things. But I think we're going to be in that fuzzy space. A lot of things will continue to be in that fuzzy space for a while. They're really good questions. And I think these are the things that these sessions are really valuable to tease out.
Yeah, and I think I really like the hint with the trust. So we looked into a little bit in 2-3 years ago, but not really. We should look more into the data commons and what they do there to learn from that. Absolutely.
Sandra, can I just take a moment to just respond to Anu's second question, which I think we didn't quite do. The trust principles and the fair ones, and I think they relate, but they're slightly different. In there, the trust principles are fundamentally around, if I put my data somewhere, can I trust that it's going to be there for the long term? What does that mean, right? Whereas fair is more about right here, right now. Can I make use of it? Can we make use of what's in there? And depending on the virtual lab or virtual research environment, trust principles may or may not apply, because a lot of virtual environments are not necessarily, the intent is not to be a long-term repository of something, of that thing. There are a tool that's used, and then you might not keep anything in that, right? In that sense, trust principles are less relevant to that. Some VREs do stay for a long time, and they are designed to be more long-term repositories of digital objects as well. For those ones, trust principles might apply. But for both of them, fair principles would apply. You want to be able to find that the VREs exist. You want to be able to find the objects that are put into that. You want the objects and the VREs to be interoperable. So I think they're both related, but different parts of it.
I see. I was thinking of VREs more as infrastructure, and that's possibly not necessarily true, because I think, trust principles are meant to be applicable to data
long-term
resources,
infrastructure,
right? Not necessarily long-term, but just data resources, right? So in the sense that you have a more operationalized aspect to it, which is not there with the FAIR. So yeah, it's yeah, my understanding of VREs has just changed probably a little bit. Yeah, thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, and we have, for example, I mentioned the NanoHub example, and which is based on Hub0 on the framework. So if you want to, as a user in there, you can give your data or a publication inside the VRE a DUI. So this framework really also looks into, the long term, which is quite cool. So yeah, they're different. I really like it. I need to look up more. Maybe we should make a session about what are VREs and what are data commons, or where's the overlap, or something like that. Yeah, I like it. So I see something in chat. Oh, thank you. You sent, yeah, nanohub.org. Yeah. So that is one of the examples here, which are going further really also, it's not a repository itself, but it helps archiving and keeping the data. Coming back for a moment, if we have the question all discussed. So let me go through this. You see that we looked at the different aspects of the principle that around metadata, or that it's registered, indexed, and for example, then the fair enabling is around if VRE provides a long-term storage service, so that is a little bit with the trust principle. So then it should also make it possible to assign PIDs to a hosted digital object. And we recommend it where it's relevant, because not every VRE can do this. And we have more of these, like, if you host digital objects, it must be accompanied by rich metadata. So we say it's recommended. If the VRE can do that, please, it should be done. And so we have several of these fair enabling for digital objects and content of a VRE. So accessible, it's really, so if they find the required VRE, they need to know users need to know how to use it, to access it. Even if it's, authentication or authorization. And also how to make objects inside the VRE. Like, for example, some VREs offer that they have group places where you can share inside a project, for example, content, or you can make it publicly available. So there are different layers of this. And also here we looked at the principle, again, we looked whether it's required or required where relevant, and there are best practices. And I make this now a little bit shorter. As I said, we can go back to it for the discussion if we want to talk more about details. So the interoperable is really also a little bit more complex, like also for software and for data objects in general, or research objects. And so to interoperate between virtual research environments, so it would be good to have really standard-based API that data that coming out of a VRE can be imported in another VRE, or also software that can be exchanged between the different VREs. And that is where we looked at that it's recommended, that really the VRE can read, write, exchange digital objects. And that it really meets also the domain relevant community standards, because that is the other aspect of VREs. VRE is normally made for a specific community. So we looked at the different, where it's fair enabling, where it's, where it's required, where it's recommended. And with that, we come to reusable. So, and yeah, the ultimate goal is really for FAIR to optimize the reuse of digital objects. And reusability and reproducibility is a big topic for VREs, because what we want is that we can reuse this in a way in a community. If people share it publicly, that it can be really reused in that way, and that it always with software creates also the same results. So we looked also here again, like, is it represented as a software package? Then it should be required that it has a license, that the information is there, that also, for example, license information is available in a machine readable format. And since VREs can be different, for example, also as an online service, so it should have some clear terms and conditions of how, how the use is displayed on the VRE website. And yeah, different fair enablings with provenance, different topics here. And with that, that was the introduction. And I'm happy to stop sharing. And I see we got some new participants. So here is the doc. Please sign up in the doc. And it's my pleasure to introduce the panel. And this is Claire Sturm, Chris Erdman, and Kiran Damavadina. And in this order, I just also let them start. So each of them gives a short introduction, how they relate to science gateways, virtual research environment, or fair topics around virtual research environment. Claire.
Right, thank you very much, Sandra. So as our discussion so far is kind of covered, my name is Claire Sturm, and I've been working with science gateways over the past 10 years. Another terminology we use as more of an overarching term is cyber infrastructure. So this is a way in which we think about bucketing anything that is a software-based or web-based environment within academic computing. And we have many of these different environments focused on various disciplines. I've had the opportunity and privilege to work with over 100 science gateways directly through different engagements through the Science Gateway Center of Excellence, and now with the Science Gateways NSF Forward NAIR pilot as well. So with these engagements, it's been through cyber infrastructure, marketing, sustainability, usability, and again, coming in with this position as a co-PI for SGX3 and consulting lead. So just digging in a little bit more, we have a science gateway where we see these expensive resources coming in with our audiences, and in this environment, they have softwares or some type of interface where it's connecting in the instruments themselves, the computing in the background, data, the community, and providing it in a core space that everyone can create a pipeline of work. But what do they actually do? We find that our science gateways are connecting researchers and educators in one space. So we're kind of taking down a little bit of that barrier between what is viewed as an exploratory space for research and what is more of a curriculum-based approach for teaching the next generation of how to use these resources. It's actually providing easier access to research software as well, providing that space for DOIs to be available, providing a space for versioning to be available, and then again, being able to stand as a longer term repository. For example, open topography that you see as the first screenshot here is a LiDAR based science gateway where they have LiDAR data throughout the entire United States. Even New Zealand is fully LiDAR scanned within open topography. And it's being used by a multitude of audiences from USGS to different survey type industries, and also even by the computing and gaming industry in order to create virtual environments that you might see like on Assassin's Creed with Notre Dame. So fun things there that are coming out of Science Gateways. For our Science Gateway Center of Excellence, we provide a variety of practical advice through consulting, networking and thought leadership through our community, and then career development for our workforce development faculty and students. This is an NSF funded project, and we have the privilege to be able to provide these resources at no cost to any research group or project within the United States. And we've had also the opportunity to do some of our sustainability training throughout the international space as well, being able to talk about what does it look like to sustain your science gateway past the initial funding that you might have received in order to stand it up. And to give a little bit more of a visualization of our metrics, we've had the opportunity through our prior award, the Science Gateways Community Institute, to initiate this community within the US. And now we're seeing it grow and continue to expand as we're able to support more science gateways, up to 235 that we've directly worked with, and even thinking about the future of science gateways and what do the platforms need in order to expand and have bigger impact to research. And that's coming out of our blueprint factories, where we're having smaller working group communities think around artificial intelligence and science gateways and a couple of other areas. And to get started, we just have a work with us link in order to request these services. I'm also happy to share any more information around our consulting, but hopefully we can kind of talk a little bit more about the examples of science gateways that I've been able to see and think about it through the badging perspective as well as we move forward.
Very cool. Thank you very much, Claire. So with that, Chris, your introduction.
Yeah, let me share my slides here. Not branded as well as Claire's, but nonetheless, I have some slides. So yeah, I'm Chris Erdman. I'm the head of open science at the SciLife Lab, which is research data infrastructure for the life sciences in Sweden. So we're actually distributed throughout the country, but most of us are in Stockholm and Uppsala. Actually, Uppsala is the university town where the data center is, where I spend most of my time. And I would say one of the things, just to say as far as connection with you know, with FAIR, would say that you know, we're working. I thought it would be good just to highlight some particular things. So one of the areas that we're focusing on at SciLife Lab, and actually in a lot of places in the world right now, sort of inspired by UNESCO, the Open Science recommendations, but also by COARA, this Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment, is we're looking at monitoring research, so open science monitoring indicators, which have a lot of sort of overlap with some of the aspects of FAIR, and so we're trying to sort of do have this sort of larger picture of like how data sharing and software sharing is happening at SciLife Lab, but also be you know, have this work sort of inspire the work in Sweden around you know, trying to sort of understand how we're doing this. And this we have a national guidelines for open science through the National Library and the government of Sweden. And I think this is, you know, this is a particular area of interest. In fact, I'm at one of the universities today talking about this, of how we can improve, you know, the monitoring that we're doing. But this is just one project there. And then we're also, you know, we're hosting a workshop in September on with the research software funders to look at metrics and the sustainability aspect of software. So, you know, this is hopefully we'll come out of here with more clear guidance on you know, metrics that are related to supporting software. You know, this is in particular this is a topic that's been that Chan Zuckerberg and Sloan have been, you know, on top of as well. So we'll have them there, and we'll be building on top of the DOOR declaration, which you can see there. The other side of this is I wear a GoFair US hat. I've had that hat on for a long time, since we've launched the, you know, been part of the team that launched that. And you know, one of the things which is, I know we'll notice this in the audience, is that we're working with NIAID and NIH to assess repositories for FAIR. But in general, we, you know, GoFair US has provided this sort of community aspect too. So we've run a lot of sessions with the community and done a lot of sort of consultation. And one of the hats I wear in GoFair US is particularly on the persistent identifier front. And so I especially I'm part of the advisory group for research activity identifier that comes actually out of Australia, the ARDC, the Australian Research Data Commons. And so that's one area too we're hoping to grow in the US. But that's just like a slice of how I'm involved with FAIR, just to give you a little bit of an idea of my background. and where I stand too. I actually, part of a research computing infrastructure in Sweden. And I will stop sharing because the rest are examples for badging or the fair conversation later. So
Yeah, yeah, we didn't get to the badging yet. So, but these were great discussions, so I didn't want to interrupt them. So, Kieran, can you, you are not co-host at the moment, but we should.
That's all right, Sandra. I don't have slides, so don't need to worry about that.
Okay, okay.
All right. So, hi everyone. I'm Kieran Darmot, and I'm based in Melbourne, Australia. I'm from a little firm called Citrix Consulting, which is provides socio-technical, works with government and research organizations around the socio-technical challenges around large information infrastructures. My background in this space has been that I've been in Australia, I've been involved with the virtual labs right from the inception of it, 2012, 2010, 2011, that time frame. Built a bunch of the initial labs in here, and where we were just trying to work out what on earth these are. Moved on to looking at the underpinning infrastructures involved in Australia's Nectar research cloud and the data storage facilities here in the early days through that. Then led the work here to essentially establish the data commons concept. We used to call it science clouds here at the beginning. Ran a couple of those pilot programs that then grown into what they are today here at ARDC, now leading the charge on that. These days, I spend a lot of my time looking at the data supply chains and the socio-technical challenges around them, and the institutional interoperability and arrangements that help this data supply chain actually work, and from a human perspective more so than a technical perspective and an institutional perspective. Been involved in the VRE infrastructure group, which has been, or interest group, which has been fantastic for the last number of years, and we continue to do that. And the Global Open Research Commons Working Group has been one of the things I've been involved in as well. Hence, being able to talk about how those two things interrelate. That's probably a good introduction to me. I think one of the things that really come to me in this space when we look at, especially working within the FAIR for VRE working group, as we were looking at it, has been the maturity that has come through over the number of years I've been involved in this, from the idea space of what is a VRE, how does it come together, to hearing like Claire saying you work with thousands of VR science gateways now, that's become really productionized. We've really become commoditized, and how we can build these things. So that's been fantastic. But the challenges end up being that we still haven't got the patterns that we can continue to use, and the best practices are still emergent in this space. So I think the work that we're doing here is going to really help that those things emerge. Sandra, back to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so thank you for your great introductions. And now we want, so the session is around, can we really create badges? What would be the way? So what, for example, can we offer to make it easier? And for, for individuals, for organizations, for virtual research environment in general, for developers. So with that, yeah, what would be, for example, your opinion about, so I know, Chris, you said, oh, I have some slides around the badging. So maybe we jump back to you and you show your slides about the badging and start the discussion like that.
yeah, I can. I don't know why I closed it down, but I guess I mean I could just walk through some of the examples based on your questions.
Yeah.
Or maybe what was the first question that you had that maybe I could start with, but I looked at it, your questions from examples.
Yeah.
For me, I guess it's always useful to look at what do we have right now? What are the examples out there, like that can help with sort of
Yeah.
visualizing what this looks like. And the most common one is, that they've done a lot of work on this is Center for Open Science on badging. And some of you may have already seen it, but they have, these open data badges, and there are some services out there, and some even journals that are using these badges, but they're still not sort of commonly used. But they're a way to sort of signal, like some form of, badging in this sense. And the other one I can think of that's more dynamic, right, is you have GitHub activity, that, you can sort of demonstrate what kind of activity you had, to other users with these visuals, or, like for below, you can see how many code reviews or issues, commits someone was made. And that's like a nice example as far as a dynamic way to show, like and I think probably more applicable to FAIR, as far as like the, sharing of the interoperability of data, and like sort of using this in various places, other places, to demonstrate your activity. And then, they have the traditional sort of LinkedIn credly, badges that you get as far as like when you do training, skills-based work. You can also get, like, I think there's sort of the more ad hoc ways of people sort of demonstrating things through, resumes, CVs. But, those are sort of some of the options. The transcript is something very traditional in the academic sense. And then, I thought this example was really interesting, from the DSI, Decentralized Persistent Identifier Group. That's sort of the nonprofit. DSI is the profit, and they're building stuff on the decentralized persistent identifier framework. But what I like about them, as far as signaling badges, is that they, in their sort of demonstration of leveraging this new identifier, they have these badging categories, like of what sort of the journals, these DSI journals, or these communities, which are publishing material, sort of value, right? Like that you have to sort of respond to in when you're sort of publishing content to these systems. So, a badge can mean, in this sense, that they've sort of adhered to a community principle, in this case. And this is actually some of similar conversations I've had with journal editors about signaling badging a little bit more, as far as what criteria they use as far as assessing articles, and for particular particular things like open science and FAIR. His other example is like signaling that there's sort of open data related to a journal, or to a journal article. So that's PLOS, Public Library of Science, has piloted this, and it has sort of demonstrated these sort of, if you can call it a badge, a way to sort of signal that there's open data related to the journal article. But what would be great is if these are sort of more dynamic, and that, like, this information is shared in places like Europe, PMC, or other, platforms, where you can sort of also start doing dynamic things and filtering based on sort of these activities in the ecosystem. And then I like this example from PyOpenSci. They review they review software as far as the underlying code, and you can get a badge, which points back to the review. But I also like this example because it demonstrates some of these other badges that are also very dynamic. Like this code runs, like this code has been reviewed in another place. It has a community, various other things, like what version, what version of Python it's using, and other things like that are dynamic as far as badging goes. And I guess the last example that I have, I think it is, no, okay. This example is actually from the NIH, the work that we're doing with NIAID. We work with the group called the NDE. This is Discovery portal that's actually taking data from all these repositories in NIAID at the NIH. And what I don't know if you can see, but what I like about this system is that they're also sort of leveraging the knowledge graph of like all these sort of particular things about, you know, like the data sets or about these resources that are dynamic, you know, that you can actually sort of click on and do queries on. I'm not sure if they are dynamic, but maybe I'm saying I want them to be dynamic, but I have to go sort of check that again. But I think it is. But I think like this is also sort of a form of badging that I think would be fantastic, is that you sort of can click on a badge, or you can grab the link to a RESTful URL, and then that can, you know, bring back all this sort of data related to that badge or that particular, you know, like that particular thing. So the and okay, this is the last one, is Hugging Face. And I thought they would be a great example to bring up, because this is a place where models are being heavily shared these days, an open sort of collaborative community. And what I think is great about it is that, so they take a very open science approach too, of leveraging sort of all that collaborative data that they have in their community, and you know, sharing that too, like, so making that sort of also very dynamic. And so you can, you know, you're just seeing one particular view of a person and what they're doing in this space. But then you know, you can actually sort of drill down at a organizational level or a particular model, and see some of these other sort of you know, additional sort of badge like things. So yeah, I think I don't know if that's like a sort of comprehensive list of badging examples, but I thought maybe it might be helpful to see some of these and to build off of them.
This is a fantastic start. Thank you so much. So all the examples there are badges already. So I did look at Hugging Face, but I did not know about all the ones you listed. So I really like that. So with that, with yeah, badges, how can we really, you know, make it easier for people to receive them on the one side, that it's, you know, nice to receive those, or how can we help that they value them? Because if people don't value the badges, then it doesn't help to, then they don't work as incentive. So this would be one of the questions, and I make it, you know, an open discussion in the panel.
Thanks, Sandra. I think, Chris, that was fantastic to go through that, and it was a really good opening for this one. I was sort of listening as you were going through the sort of 4 categories that you talked about, and that those seem to fall into. There were signaling types of badges that signal something about what was capable. There were participation badges that we talked about. You know, you're participating in community standards, what's doing in there, that kind of one. There's credibility ones. Has somebody verified these ones? Have others looked at it and said something's right or in there? And then there are certification badges. So there's sort of different categories, I think, that are there. And how do they fit in? And as Sandra said, you know, which ones? Some of those need incentivizing. Signaling badges are probably less so. I think there's a self-incentivize if but that again needs a certain degree of others using those. And if you're sending a signal out, you're wanting somebody to make use of that, then I think that's so. Yeah, I think that was really useful.
Great, thanks. Claire?
Build on that, definitely within the software space where we see science gateways publishing software packages, we see those signaling badges and the concepts of what ones are open source versus which ones have licenses to protect the software, restricting even access to who is able to really utilize the software based off of the funding source or the data resource that was available to design the software, and making sure that it's protected appropriately. We also see a lot of incentives in the educational science gateways for those certifications or credibility. Credibility more so if it's a space for instructors to take curriculum. What are credible packages of curriculum that have been verified within maybe a course curriculum, might be undergraduate or even K through 12. We also see science gateways utilizing certification as an avenue to train the next generation. So how do you get a student to take a little bit more of a course outside of their standard set of syllabus within their university course? And these instructors are then embedding science gateway practices, such as launching a tool or making an adjustment to a Jupyter notebook, and then having the student publish that Jupyter notebook. So by the student being able to take those steps, they then get an award of an additional certificate offered by the Science Gateway itself. And we've really seen a lot of integration through APIs with LinkedIn as a primary if we're involving students within the US, largely because they're seeing it as a way to connect back and show to potential employers or even potential schools that they're applying for what extra steps they've taken. I think the hardest thing is keeping track of it all. There's a lot of other external platforms outside of the Science Gateway or VRE itself, such as LinkedIn and its own entity. We have ResearchGate as another entity where you're tracking the publications, but also ways that people have expanded their own profile of themselves. So I think the more opportunities we can think of and recommend to science gateways as they're designing what they're trying to achieve with their audiences, making sure it's dispersed throughout some of these main channels. So it makes it easier for the researcher or the student. And in addition, it's easier then for adoption with new users to the Science Gateway. There's more of that incentive there.
Yeah, and Sandra, I'll just I guess to build off of all these things too, is that like I think, you know, like a badge that is dynamic, that it's actually, you know, allows you to sort of expose some the sort of underlying data that can be, you know, leveraged in another system is the best thing you can do. Like to have a static badge, I don't think, you know, like in this, you know, we need something to act on. And I actually, here's another sort of example. I just thought of it while I was listening here, is that like sometimes we see well, we see these examples of repositories because we're assessing repositories where they you know, they'll put a badge on their repository for, you know, let's just say fair, right? Like they'll put a badge, or, you know, like they'll just, you know, use the logo or something like that. And it just doesn't go to anything, you know, it's not like dynamic. And I think there's this other sort of some of the other repository certification groups don't necessarily have that as well, right? Like you have a logo, but, you know, it would be great if you could sort of follow that to some the data that's exposed. And, you know, like it's not just for that one case, you know, thinking about it for your own particular case. So, you know, I think that maybe speaks to the fact about signaling. But, you know, for these groups to sort of understand that it's not just about signaling, it's about, you know, exposing your data so that you actually can participate in a wider system where you're, you know, like you're the various aspects that, you know, are part of that badge for your repository can live in a sort of wider place, you know, where people can find it and access that information and make decisions on it, right? And so I think that's the thing I lament about, I think the most, is that like it would be great if some of these, like if you make a badge, that the make it sort of also so that it's exposing data too, or something like that, that you can sort of access the underlying data behind that badge.
Chris, I think that's a really valid point, and something I was thinking as well is that we are in the age of machines talking to machines, right? I'm sitting there programming a set of AI tools that are talking to each other, that are going out there and trying to grab information for me, and they need to be interpreting these badges, especially the signaling badges, I think, so that they act as my agent, right? If I'm going to look at it, a badge, and say, oh, decide this is good for me or bad for me, or how I want to react to it, I want the machines to be able to understand that as well. And so yeah, I think we're very much in that space now, and we need to think about what do they mean. When putting a badge visually, fantastic, but it needs to be much more than that.
Very cool. Yeah, I like with the different categories and really, saying like, oh, there must be something beyond signaling, and we're thinking about, communication between machine to machine, but humans also to machines and machine readable content. Yeah, with that, only I have more questions prepared, but would like to open it for the audience if you have questions for the panelists around badging, if you would like to ask something, because I always,
Yeah,
yeah,
yes, Sandra. Yeah. About the badges, I think when you see badge, you always expect to have some certification that the badge has been obtained, or can be shown because you have implemented some of the things, for example, that is related to the badge. So I think it's very important that people seeing the badge are confident that under that badge there's a work of certifying that this is really true, that everything has been implemented as the badge is saying. So I think this part is quite important for trust. So users will always ask that. It's like when you buy organic food, you have the badge, so you trust that everything has been done behind that badge to be sure that what you interpret by seeing that badge is what is supposed to be. So I think this part is important.
absolutely. And only this, not that it's part of the topic, but an
Mm.
organic badge in the US is different than an organic badge in Europe. So I think we have also this from different organizations. That was, of course, not an example from, but I think the trust topic is a big one. Therefore, yeah, we have to be very careful, especially bringing in badges that we can really say this is quality. This is really checked. I mean that is very important. Trust is a big topic, and maybe that could be, maybe we look at badges with the comment from Anu also with, maybe we have to look at trust principles for badges. Maybe that is something. What do you think about that? Sorry, that is a question I didn't prepare, but it came up. Anyone want to say something about that?
Just a final comment. It's just like if you know about the data repositories, they have the core trust seal. So meaning that there are many rules they need to have implemented so they can get this badge. The core trust seal is quite well known for data repositories.
But would that, for example, the core trust seal, and I don't know it so
No,
well.
that's the one that I didn't mention the specific name, but that's another one that I would love to have it as more of a dynamic thing that people can expose the sort of underlying metadata related to that core trust seal, because people put that on their repositories, the badge, but it doesn't I think like just exposing that metadata more would be great. because like it is a pretty rigorous program that that they have for certifying repositories, a bunch of criteria, right? And exposing that like would be great. But yeah.
So Chris, on the same lines, when you say exposing the metadata, what exactly do you mean? You mean have an API that has access to the evaluation that happens within CTS? Or, I'm just wondering because, import, which is the repository that I oversee, is also CoTrust Seal certified. And we just have, as you said, a logo of CoTrust Seal on our webpage, and that's about it.
Well, yeah, here's here's the really interesting thing about it, right? Like, so ideally you would have like, so badges also have sort of like an underlying link, it could be like a persistent identifier or sort of like a link to sort of, yeah, like to an API that would point to, it has an identifier related to your particular certification. And then you basically, just click on that badge, or below the badge is the the identifier and the link is exposed, and you can actually follow it to access, like the metadata underlying that, the criteria, and how, your review, so you can go to the site and see it particularly. But the catch part of this is that when you're sitting at a repository and thinking like, oh, is that our priority to add something like that? You're like thinking, no, it's not, because really we just put the badge up and, like they can go to that system and find us. But the reality is like, that it's more of a community aspect. You have to think about it collectively, right? Like if all the sort of repositories signal that and point to the same place, then it becomes easier for the curators of that information, to like link to that information, make it available. Because I'm thinking of one particular case, like RE3 data is where, a lot of repository information sits, and, like people have to go and gather that information, right? And so they would, but that could be just an extra step for a curator at RE3 data to go say, oh, at least you're doing that. You signaled the badge, right? Like, and they can go back and try and find that information and link to it. So at least you've done better than some other repositories, where like they, that information's buried. It's like, maybe you can't even find it, but it's like steps of action here, right? Like, and I think, from my perspective, like, I think just putting the badge on your repository is great, because other repositories don't necessarily do that sometimes, like that they don't necessarily put that in a findable place, like where that information can be exposed. So yeah.
I wonder if it is something that the CoTrust Seal itself can provide, like provide a PID and an embedded badge that can be put onto a repository. Maybe this is something to bring up.
I think so. I think
It's
that
been a while since I visited, but I was just looking to see if they do that. Yeah, like because I didn't think it was good last time, like, but then again, I haven't looked at it recently, but I don't think they did that necessarily, or exposed, like it, to that point, but I could be wrong.
No,
So
they
Chris,
don't.
I think you point in there is, that burden of the exposing that should be on the provider of the the certification, right? That is saying, this is the process that they have gone through, and here's the record of their being granted that certification, and here's all that details. That if when you start to make that the burden on the person who's actually gone through that, unless there's a direct value back to them, that's always, as you said, that's going to be very down on the priority list to go off and do that,
No,
right?
a service should have yeah, actually, I know, like, yeah, I looked at the site and it's like PDFs, they have links to PDFs, and the reality is that the service itself, Core Trust Seal, but I think they have minimal resources too, right? But they should have a page that says, you've been certified, great. Here's our badge, and it has like all this sort of, you know, that sort of additional related information that links, you know, like that has the persistent link and, you know, has that sort of link to where you can access the underlying metadata, but I don't see it. So yeah, I think you're right, Kieran. It's the burden is on the service, you know, to maybe do this, and maybe Anu, you can influence them. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I do serve on as a reviewer for Code Trust Seal, so I'll probably provide this as a feedback. I think it's useful and it's definitely something that aligns very well, right? Because we talk a lot about PIDs, so you definitely need PIDs for this.
Yeah,
Chris,
and it
I just know from the this is just another example for this case is, but I think from the perspective of because I work you know, I worked closely with Zenodo and helped launch it back in the day. They have a sort of badging scheme that has this kind of you know, this ability, so you basically copy this code that has the information on how to access the underlying data, and you know, they have that sort of facility there for people that, you know, to include that kind of badge on your site, you know, for code. And so similarly, like Core Trust Seal could do something similar to that, you know, like but anyways, sorry, I don't know if I interrupted you, Karen.
No, you didn't. I'm still a bit curious about the metadata that you're asking or thinking about, right? To me, something like Core Trust Seal is essentially lowering the work required for me to trust somebody, right? If in the absence of anything like that, I need to go and do a lot of due diligence on my part to say, oh, do I put my data there or do I trust them to do that? But what Core Trust Seal does for me would be that I trust the process that Core Trust Seal has established in certifying something. And because I trust that third party, if they have given a badge, then it means, okay, I don't need to go and do the same level of due diligence for my part, because they have the certification and I trust that Core Trust Seal have done the due diligence on my behalf to give that certification. So in that kind of scenario, I go, ooh, I don't really need to think about the details, because then I'm back to not needing that. That's how I was thinking. I tend to think about that, but curious as to, you know, when you say seem to have a reason why it makes sense to, I can't quite figure that out.
But I really like the idea also, you know, that let's say with a Core Trust Seal, that we could say, if somebody is new, who knows, you know, when you come new to the space, that this is really something you can trust. And if we could do something like metadata also about, so this is a seal that is trusted by all these organizations, that would be helpful, because then people could go through a list and say, oh, if these, you know, all use that, then I'm sure, because that's a little bit like recommendation from peers. We discussed with VREs a couple of sessions here at the plenaries. How do people really trust, for example, a VRE, and that simulations are doing what they expect to do? And one thing is, yeah, they look at publications. So maybe, you know, that could be the metadata publication about these badges. And they listen to peers who they will trust, because that is, I think, in our world often we trust certain peers. We know that they're knowledgeable in that area. So if, for example, Chris will tell me, Sandra, this is a good badge, I would believe him. And now he will use it. No, but that is, I think we need a system maybe for that, you know, to show this has
There
been
was
peer reviewed, you know?
there
Maybe we need something.
yeah, there is a center that, you know, there's I guess the NISO, or the National Standards Organization has put together some, guidance on badges. But I was also like looking at something I knew about like a long time ago, like Badger was another sort of hot project in the badging space. And they looked at this too, like the anatomy of a badge. And it actually kind of has a nice image on that page for Badger. But yeah, like that guy could be a nice, like you said, the sort of assessment for badges. That would be
Yes, and
helpful as well.
because even if people are motivated and we have the same around science gateways, people would like to know whether, that works, or whether there's a recommendation or something like that, because it gets so overwhelming already. And not, I think we need more badges, to be honest. But to really make them incentivizing, we have to have the trust. And people need to understand what are the different badges about. So we are 10 minutes from the end of the session, and I know I did cut a lot of time out of the group discussion, but I think this was already a group discussion. I really liked that. So with that, I wanted to ask whether in the audience are more questions about badges, or we have also some nice questions in the agenda, what we partially already discussed, like who gives badges, for example, who can give some badges for VRE, so we discussed that. I would be also interested, maybe I should stop here and give everyone a chance to bring another topic up for the last 10 minutes. Is there anything around badges people would like to discuss?
Can I ask maybe a naive question? Are alt metrics and, such, I guess, data considered badges, or they're not?
I happily give it to everyone else. Also, I think this is not a naive question. You never ask a naive question. I know you also only for 1.5 hours. There's no naive question from you. I think all data, in my opinion, and it's just, with a little bit of thinking about it, I think not all data should have badges, because there's data. So, for example, that is interim data. I think any data that you want to keep in a repository probably should get badges. But we also have in simulation software, not every software package is made to stay around for 10 years on purpose. It has a certain purpose, and then it should, but that is hard to, distinguish. Is that the direction you wanted to go, or you meant it differently, the question?
No, I was just wondering because there is kind of, there are metrics that are collected about data reuse, right? Or any reuse, and these are then kind of displayed in repositories and things of that kind. Or so I wonder if that's something that would be considered badging or not.
Can I try and respond to that a little bit? I think there is, again, an interesting point here. What is a badge and what's the purpose of that? And I think, Sandra, I'll challenge you a little bit on saying everything needs a badge and all data should be. I think they shouldn't. I think we need to have limited number of badges that actually have more meaning to them. Badges to say whether this is temporary data or not, I don't think those should be badges. They're just flags and they should be considered that. They're just attributes and statuses of things as they're doing through. Badges should, I think, be something that signals something more meaningful about the data. Like, when we talk about, Chris talked about the participation sort of badges, that's saying that somebody has taken part in something, that's it's kind of like the badges you put up on decorative badges on soldiers, because they tell, hey, you've achieved something, or you follow something, or you in that sense. And then cycling back to your question, I think those sort of metrics, maybe incentives to work towards, because that's the social reward, right? That you're getting back. Because I wouldn't collect. Why would I want to go to the effort of doing something to achieve a badge unless I'm getting something back from that, whether that is career progression or recognition, or something needs to come back to me, right? So maybe I think those metrics are ones that can be used to give badges for certain class of things. But those on its own, I would not think them as badges.
I see.
It's interesting. I wanted to build off of that participation aspect. So I don't know if I told you, I knew I used to wear a hat of a funder, and the interesting thing is we were talking about our sort of open science policy and that kind of thing, and we wanted to look at sort of good open science actors, right? Like it was starting to look at like, okay, when we're reviewing proposals, we also sort of review proposals that, these are good actors as far as open science goes, like they're responding to our policy, or just in general, they've moved in their career to being more open. And I'm just wondering, like, like sort of your question around alt metrics and the signaling, that actually would have been helpful, because you have to go and dig for that information. You have to go and find they published how many papers and how many of them have been open, and out of all those papers, like how much data have they shared, and as sort of a sort of signaling badge that you could sort of click on and drill down into the underlying data. That actually could be really helpful from a review perspective when you're looking at, like if you have a more advanced open science or, open access policy, that could be really helpful, besides having to do all that work and drill down and, find it yourself about someone. And that could be really great, for, like, again, what is the incentive for the researcher? Well, the researchers will want to use something like that because they know that they're starting to get reviewed, like that funders are starting to use it, like as a signal, and then to access the data about how they're doing as far as these policies go. But anyways, I just started taking your question and thinking, oh, wow, that would have been really useful. Like, because the amount, like the amount of time you have to go and try to assess whether someone's open. Yeah. Anyways.
Okay, very cool. With that, we have 3 minutes left. Anu, you wanted to say something additionally? Because you
No,
were...
that's it. Thank you.
Okay.
I think I've taken up enough time.
So thank you very much to the panelists. I give everyone of the panelists the chance for a last comment about badges. What do you want people to know about badges? What is your opinion? Whatever you think. And I start with Kiran.
Thanks, Sandra. Look, I think it's been a fantastic conversation, and I think it's something to keep exploring. And it has its place. And coming back to my point that we are in the age that the badges need to be for both human and machines. But yeah, it's a really good time for this topic, because all of our research environments, we're getting so much where we are starting to proliferate them. We need to start to be able to differentiate these things, and these badges, one way of doing it, incentivizing the different groups in their really valuable conversations here.
I agree. Claire?
Yeah, definitely agree. And it was a fantastic conversation. I think this continuing to help the community as they try to utilize badges outside of our traditional data forward perspectives. That way, it's an ability for educational science gateways to incentivize audiences, but still trying to keep some standardization. And especially with that concept of linking back to a badge, the credentials of how it was badged, I think, is a key concept to take away.
Fantastic. Thank you. Chris.
Yeah, I would just say like I also sort of value the fact that you know, there are some organizations out there that are trying, you know, despite that they don't necessarily have to do this, that they're sort of, you know, trying to explore the space and push things forward. And, you know, like particularly I know like in the case of, you know, publishing environments of, you know, signaling that you've shared your data or stuff like that. I really appreciate that, you know, places like PLOS are really trying to explore this and also expose that data, you know, that open science indicator data so that, you know, like it can be used in the wider, you know, ecosystem. So I think, you know, that's I guess building on Kieran's this is kind of exciting now. You can start doing these things like exposing this data, and it's great to have organizations that are doing that, right? Like that are not just stopping at, do badges really work? So they're actually trying to leverage them and you know, like really trying to, you know, push what we think about them.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was a fantastic discussion. Thank you, yes, the panelists. Thank you all for joining and being part of the discussion. This is great. So I think we are at a point with badges. I would love to have another session at the next plenary around the topic with a little bit different questions, maybe. I think it's a lot to explore still. And with that, yeah, thank you everyone. And maybe see you in another session at RDA.